Welcome to the Happy Mindset. Today's episode is episode number 82, and today's episode title is called Lessons in Leadership. So today I'm joined by Noel Massie. Noel is the former vice president of UPS. In his role, he directly led thousands of people and indirectly led hundreds of thousands of people. So in today's episode, Noel shares some insights and lessons that have helped him to get to the position that he was in, and to do it by respecting people and by listening to them. So a lot of today's episode is about communication. So you'll learn when people will listen to you. You'll learn how to communicate to people without being aggressive or argumentative with them, and how to influence positive behavior. So Noel talks candidly about all these topics. I learned a lot about the importance of listening as a leader, and Noel talks about where he learned the importance of communication, what unexpected source came into his life that taught him the importance of choosing communication as his minor in his degree, which is what he ultimately did when he saw that this was something to take serious in the real world. So I enjoyed talking to Noel. He's a very kind of no-nonsense approach, but also I feel he's a very understanding person as well at the same time. So I know you'll get a lot from this episode. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Okay, so thanks for joining us today, Noel.
Hey, sure, Dennis. Nice to be with you today.
So my first question is, who are you, Noel, and what are you doing in the world today?
Well, Dennis, I just retired from a global logistics company after 42 years called UPS. And while I was with UPS, I held a number of positions, but my last position was as vice president of U.S. operations. And in that capacity, I ran UPS operations in the United States from coast to coast. And I had responsibility for our day-to-day delivery operation, as well as the customer relationships that we have in that space. And of course, here in the U.S., we have about 380,000 employees. And we have approximately 100,000 employees outside the U.S., international countries. And under my guidance was about 200,000 of that population.
Where did your career start? How did you become that person?
Well, that's an interesting story, but I don't know that it's any more interesting than any other person's. As you travel through life. But I started at UPS looking for a part-time job as a college student in 1977. I was an electrical engineering student at a state university here in the U.S. in California, San Jose, California, as a matter of fact. And I needed a part-time job to pay for my education, at the time. And interestingly enough, I had just finished actually an internship that I'd had at IBM for a year. So I worked at IBM as an intern when I was a freshman, sophomore in the middle of those 2 years. And that internship concluded in July or in May of 1977. And I had it for a year, and I needed a part-time job to continue to pay for my schooling. And UPS was hiring part-time employees. So that's how I started at UPS, as a part-time package handler. And once I got close to graduation, about 3 years after I started, I was offered and accepted, of course, a promotion as a supervisor in operations in Oakland, California. And from there, my career progressed. Ultimately, I became a manager in 1984. I had about 400 employees, and I look back on that now, and it was kind of it'd be unheard of today, but I was 26 years old, and I was put in charge of an operation with 4,000 employees in it, and under me I had 9 management team leaders, and 4 years after that I was promoted again, and I got what we call a division, where I had managers reporting to me who all had large work groups, and I got a division manager's job in 1988. When I was 31. And then from there, in 1995, I took a relocation from California to Philadelphia. where I was promoted to operations manager in Philadelphia. And I had the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area. And then in 1997, I became a president. And I was promoted to president of what we call the Chicago area. And I held that president's assignment in Chicago for about 6 years. Then I became president of the Virginia area. Ultimately, I went to Southern California and became president of Southern California, where I had about 25,000 employees. And then in 2015, I was asked to come to Atlanta, or to go to Atlanta, which is where we have our world headquarters, and take over the position as vice president of U.S. operations. So for me, it was 42 years, but it felt like it went like a blur. And I think that's just how life goes. But I come from a working class family in a working class neighborhood. As a matter of fact, I grew up in a single parent household. My mom divorced my father when I was about 3, I think. And then she remarried when I was 7. And that marriage lasted a few years. But from the time I was 10, approximately, and some interspersed, she was the primary caregiver. Pretty strong woman, great values, and I think that all of her kids really reflect her work ethic. But I had a great background. My grandfather, who I didn't mention, really was the person that had the most influence on me. Quite frankly, he ran a barbershop. He cut hair, and I used to go into it on Saturdays and sweep hair. So I got a lot of lessons from him as I grew up as a child. I started sweeping hair when I was 7. But he really was instrumental in all of the success that I had early in my career in terms of a mentor. I think everyone needs a mentor. I was lucky to have a great mentor, right? My grandfather.
What were some of the key lessons that you learned from your grandfather at that age?
The most important lesson I learned from my grandfather, well, there were a number of them, but the most important lesson I learned from my grandfather is that when you agree to do something and you're being paid to do it, you have a responsibility to do that. And the person that's paying you to do whatever it is they're asking you to do shouldn't have to continue to ask you to do it. I mean, you took the pay for it, you took the money, as he would say, then you're expected to do the job. And I used that throughout my entire career, particularly in situations where employees were, I think, maybe, and this happens to everyone. This isn't, one thing about all people, whether they're the boss or the employee, we're all human. And so people are going to behave in a way that looks human. So you have to expect that no one's perfect. But I used to use that a lot when, I'd have a person that was moving outside the lines. Let's say they weren't doing their job. They were coming to work late. They were, creating all kinds of issues in the work group for their peers, other coworkers, and before I would ever take a hard line with anyone, which I think is inappropriate anyways. I think people are human, so you have a conversation with them as adults. But I think sometimes people need to be reminded that, number one, they're an adult. That number two, when the job was open, they raised their hand and said, please give it to me, right? They put in, no one ever forced anyone to take a job, at least not in modern times. I mean, I understand history, but we're talking about free enterprise right now. But no one made anyone take a job. And so when I would sit down with an employee, I'd go, did we force you to work at UPS? And the answer would be no. I guess so. The job was open and you raised your hand and you said, pick me for this job. Please pick me for this job. I want to be a UPS driver for $37 an hour. Please pick me for this job. And you know what? We agreed and we picked you. So here we are today. And yesterday you didn't have a particularly good day. And over the last week, you've been late 3 or 4 times. But you asked for this job. You know what? And if you're going to take the money, you're supposed to do the job. And my grandfather was where I got that from, right? If you're going to take the money, then you're expected to do what you promised to do. And 99% of the time, that would solve the problem. 99% of the time, when a person really thinks about their personal responsibility to something, when it's put in their head, I think a certain way, a correct way, Not that I think every way that I've ever done is correct, but I think that's just basic common sense, what I just talked about. They respond to that, and their behavior at a minimum would improve, right? So you might have to do 2 or 3 interventions, but my grandfather taught me that early in life when I was 7. Son, if you're going to take the money, you should do the job, and we shouldn't have to ask you to do the job. And that was sweeping hair. You know, the other, I think, bigger lesson I learned from my grandfather is he was born, and this is important in the story because he was born in 1900. Think about that. And it didn't dawn on me till I was in my 20s, the largest of that. But he was born in 1900. And, you know, as a child, I was born in 1957, but as a child, I swept hair in his barbershop when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So that would have been the early 60s, 63, 64, 65 in there. And he ran a barbershop. He had 3 chairs plus his chair. And when he would, but he also worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad. And so when he would go to work for the railroad as a ticket taker, you know, punching tickets, he'd be gone for a week because he'd leave the U.S. in California and he'd go across his route, which I think went into Texas. They turn around, just like airline pilots do, you know, they leave home. Same thing on the trains then. And he'd come home and then he'd cut hair for, you know, 4 or 5 days and he'd go on the road again. Then he'd come home, and that was kind of the cycle. But what he taught me at a really early age, as soon as I was able to understand it, 7, 8, 9 years old, is that he met people from all over the world being on the trains. He met people from all over the world that would ride the trains, whether they're from Europe, from Asia, Americans, Canadians. You know, he met people from everywhere. And the one thing he said to me that stuck in my head and was profound was people are not different in nature. They're just different in terms of where they're from and culture, but everybody wants the same thing. They want to get up, be able to take care of their family, raise their family, have kids that they can feed, security and safety in their life, and they want to be respected. And he made that clear to me as a kid that, you know, people talk about, you know, cultural difference, racial difference, religious differences, and those things all are real. I'm not saying they're not, but here's what he made important to me, and what I understood is that people are the same, and that people want intuitively the same things in their lives, right? And so respect was the foundation of that. Who doesn't want to be respected? I mean, I don't care who you are. I mean, you know, if I start a conversation with you and I lack respect, probably not going to be a good discussion. And so as a leader, you have to remember that what all people really want are the same kind of basic security things in their lives. And as their leader, they're looking to you to help them achieve that. And it really starts with a certain mutual understanding and respect. And too many times what I would see with people that worked under me, and of course, ultimately I had a couple 100,000 people, but you know, when I was in the beginning of my career, I started off with 10 people, then I had 80 people, then I had 400 people, then I had, you know, 5,000 people. You know, that's what promotions do, is they give you more stuff. But the one thing that was always important to me from the very beginning with any group I work with is that we will be a work group where respect rules. I will not allow disrespect to exist. And I would announce that. And I would announce it on the front end. I'm going to respect you. You need to respect your coworkers. You need to respect your profession in this job. You need to respect all customers. And we need to respect each other. And at no time is disrespect going to take root in our group. And it worked for me. And it worked for me because people could get behind that concept. And my grandfather was key to teaching me that.
Were you always a leader in your life, or was there any time where you were a bit lost and you were a follower?
No, I have to be honest about that. You know, I think I came from a family that was highly motivated in that way. And even though I grew up in an urban community, when I was a young child, I always wanted to be out front, you know. I played individual sports mainly. I did some team sports. Track was a team sport I did, and that was probably the biggest team sport that I ever participated in. But I boxed when I was 8. I boxed from the time I was 8 till I was like 16. And I was on a boxing team, but it's an individual sport. I wrestled. I was on a wrestling team, but it's individual. But when I was a freshman in junior high school here in America, in the 9th grade is what a freshman in junior high school is here. I ran for class president, and I won. And I was always interested in being involved in things that concerned the group, right? And I was absolutely inclined to leadership early in my life. So when there was an opportunity, would I have been disappointed if I didn't become class president? I'll be honest with you, no. But I ran for it because I thought there were things that I was interested in doing as a freshman that, that kind of thing was appealing to me. But when I was 16 and a half, I got a job at McDonald's, the Golden Arches, right? It was my first real job. And within a few months, the owner of the owner of that McDonald's franchise made me a crew chief, right? So I had experience in leadership early. Class president as a freshman, crew chief at McDonald's at 16 and a half. So I gravitated to it. I mean, it became fundamental for me to look for leadership opportunities by the time I was an adult, particularly when I went to UPS at 19. I was there for 3 months and I was promoted into a part-time supervisor's job. So so to your question, I guess, not point, but to your question, leadership roles kind of found me, Dennis. I don't know that I pursued them, but they found me. And I think they found me because I just had a nature to be outgoing, vocal, and that was really what would draw people towards me for that, is I wasn't bashful, right? I never had one bashful moment in my life. I wouldn't say, everyone that knows me would say, well, Noel's outgoing and an extrovert, but I'm not the guy at the party that is the center of attention. But if you have a project, a volunteer project, or you have, something that involves a group, I'm gonna definitely step up and speak up in that. I'm gonna be a vocal part of that.
Mm. Did you always know that communication was an essential part of leadership?
No, I didn't. Here's the interesting, point about that. I consider communication to be the most important skill that anyone needs to develop, leader or not. But if you're in a leadership position, I don't care if you have 2 people. It doesn't matter whether you have 2 people or 200,000 people. The requirement doesn't change. Just because you have more people doesn't make how you communicate to them more important. It's important if there's 2 people. But I learned that from an engineer. So interestingly enough, when I was in college, I said I studied electrical engineering. And I had an internship at IBM, International Business Machines. And I had that internship from 1976, maybe February of 76 to like April of 77, 3 months before I started UPS. And I worked with a group of engineers, and not one single one of them was from America. They were all from outside the United States. And they worked in a group that had a project they were working on for something that didn't exist at the time, which was the laser printer. And we called it Project X, right? It was funny, right? So Project X was a laser printer, and I was a lab tech, right? So an engineer would develop a lens or a gear or something, and then we would just test the durability or efficacy of the gear or the lens, right? To what they were looking to do. But I did it for a year, and 2 of the engineers, for an example, were from Taiwan. One was from mainland China, and he had escaped communism to come to the United States. But one individual in particular who was Russian, named Manfred Dreblow. At the time, Manfred had to be early 40s, I think. And here I was a student, 18, 19. And Manfred was a really quiet guy. And he's Russian. He had a heavy Russian accent. And everyone was intimidated by this guy. Like no one, even the engineers, there were 12 other engineers in the group, they were intimidated by Manfred, right? Because he was the classic gruff type of guy, right? He was smart as heck. but he was this gruff type of guy, right? And everyone would steer away from him. But he liked the students, so he liked us. That was a good thing, right? But he didn't. But Manfred was the person that had the most influence on me while I was at IBM, and he had a life influence on me to this day that was critical to my success. And I was coming in one day, and he was sitting in his office, and I walked by the door, and he put his glasses down, and he looked over the top of his rim, and he said, "Hey, kid." And I backed up and looked in the door, that typical scene where I backed up, I walked by, I backed up, stuck my head in and said, yes, sir. He says, "You got a minute?" I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, of course." He said, "Have a seat." And I sat down. And he said, "What is it? Tell me about yourself." So I told him, a little bit about myself. And he goes, "So what is it that you want to do? What do you want to be?" And I said, "Well, I'm studying electrical engineering. I want to be an electrical engineer." He goes, "Why do you want to be that?" He goes, "Why do you want to be that? Just to get paid or make money?" Or he says, "There's got to be a reason beyond that. In this business, there just has to be other reasons you want to do it." He says, "Because it's not very exciting." He says, "It's not a very exciting business." He says, "So tell me a reason." And I kind of fumbled around with a few answers other than money, and he said, "Hey, listen, I'll just tell you this. I think a lot of you've done some really nice work for me because I had tested some of his stuff." He goes, "Let's stay in touch, just every now and then, come sit down, have a few minutes with me." And you know what? Every week I'd go sit down with Manfred for like 30, 40 minutes. And what I learned about Manfred is that his whole family, not some of them, but his entire family had been murdered during World War II, during the conflict. When the Nazis invaded Russia, his family was killed. And at the age of 9, he walked 600 plus miles to his uncle's house behind enemy lines. And he would eat shoes and rats to survive. And he felt like someone who'd gone through that. Just know it. I don't know how to explain what that is, but he felt like that person to me. His uncle was able to get him to America. Well, first he went from his uncle's house in Russia. First they migrated through Europe and ended up ultimately in London, where he and his uncle and the family lived for a while. And he started his education. And then he ultimately was able to get into the U.S. And go to a university in the U.S. And Manfred had the equivalent of 3 PhDs worth of education. And he would be the first to say, "But I didn't get the PhDs because it was his quiet rebellion." He felt like the smartest person that created the most stuff, that it was obvious. And he had 16 patents he had created for IBM. But Manfred wasn't the boss, right? His manager had a master's degree, and his manager probably knew about half as much as Manfred, in terms of his capabilities in math, sciences, and development. And so the thing that I got from Manfred is he said, "Hey, kid, listen, the thing I'm really bad at," and he said this to me, he goes, "The thing I'm really bad at is communication." He says, "You know who runs companies?" He says, "The people who can not only have an idea, but can articulate it and influence people to use that idea." He goes, "And I'm not that guy." He says, "You see that guy down the hall? That's my boss." He goes, "He's like a master of that." He says, "He's not smarter than anyone here, but he's running the place." He says, "So if you're majoring in electrical engineering, minor in communications." And I did. I went to school, literally in the next semester, my minor became speech communication. And so I had a science a degree as my major, and I had a liberal arts minor. And it was a turning point for me because I could, I wasn't bashful about speaking, but I couldn't do it really well. And I certainly didn't understand some of the nuanced aspects of communication.
What were some of the nuances you were missing?
Well, I think a lot of people miss them, from voice inflection at a moment to how to use a pause to your advantage, to facial expressions, to looking into a crowd to see who's getting the message and who isn't. Eye contact, making people feel like you're only talking to them when you have a room of 50 people. I can spot very quickly if I'm speaking, and I've given a lot of talks, but I can spot within 2 to 3 minutes who's not getting the message. And if I have a room of 50 people and I'm looking at each person, I'm literally moving around the room, making eye contact with 50 people. And I look at them directly to bring them into the conversation. Those are things I learned early in my life. So when I would talk to a group of employees, I knew how to use communication and techniques around communication to get a person with me in the discussion, even if it was a group. Because when you're giving a talk, if you stop and pause and I look at you directly in the eye and I go, hey, Dennis, this is a really important topic around drone technology at UPS. I just spoke to you. And then I can move to the person sitting next to you and I'm gonna look them direct in the eye and I'm gonna go, and the reason, Elaine, and you use names and it brings people with you. Those are important techniques. They work for a reason because people want to feel included, and it starts with how you have a discussion with them. But Manfred was the person that literally influenced me to change my major. And I will tell you that my ascension through UPS had more to do with my ability to communicate than how smart I was, okay, all day, easily. There's a lot of really super smart people in the world that do not know how to have a human discussion to influence behavior. Because here's where it really lands, Dennis. Leadership, and when I say the word leadership, I want you to think about it like I'm saying a cake. Okay, leadership is one thing. It's like a cake is something you bake in an oven, blah, blah, blah. But generally, when you eat a cake, it's because you like the cake, okay? When you follow a leader, it's because you like the leader, right? Okay, leadership is influence. That's all it is. And not all leaders are good leaders, right? History will tell you that, but leadership is one thing, the ability to influence someone's behavior in a direction you want it to go. That's not manipulation. That's leadership. And people make their own decisions independently about whether they're going to follow a leader. That's why it's not manipulation. So if I want you to follow me, and I'm not using force, threats, I'm not using coercion, I don't have something hanging over your head, you're going to say, I'm going to follow you willingly or not. That's how it works. It's an independent decision. So leadership is the ability to get someone's behavior influenced. And if you're going to influence someone's behavior to follow you, to be the leader of the group, then you better darn well understand how to reach them. And communication skills are paramount to allowing you to do that.
How about the listening part? Were you always good at the listening part?
That's communication.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it's the most important aspect of communication. I would do what I would call listening checks in every interaction I had, and it would be a very simple thing. You never proceed forward unless you have firmly gotten a sense that the person you're talking to understands what you just said. So a listening check is critical to all communication. It's the most important role. And, there's a number of ways that you can validate whether a person understands something. I happen to like a few techniques. It depends on what you're doing at the time. But if you're training a person to do a job, what I advocated for 100% in the US was that my leaders and managers and people on the floor, training drivers, people to do package car loading, unloading, that they use what's called the 7 steps of training. And anyone can Google that. But the 7 steps of training works because the teacher explains the task to the employee or person. They have the person while they demonstrate the task or concept. They explain every step they're doing in step one. In step two, they have the employee do the task and explain each portion of the task. In step three, they repeat the process. Step four, and they do a listening check. But all throughout the 7 steps of training, it's a continual listening check to make sure that retention is happening, so that you're not asking someone to do something you didn't teach them really to do, right? Which is what you see a lot of, is marginalized instruction, right? So I advocate for the 7 steps of training. The other piece of advice I would give all people is to read Stephen Covey's book on the 7 habits of highly effective people. I think that's a great book. And I think that the concepts in it are simple to understand and they make a lot of sense. And then the 7 steps of highly effective people, one of the most important, or the 7 habits of highly effective people, excuse me, one of the most important habits is they're great listeners, right? That they understand that they have to listen. It's, so first seek to be understood before you want someone to understand. It's really an important component. So listening is, I think, the skill that people are the most deficient in by far, right? By rote, humans are typically terrible listeners. And you know why that is? Because they have an agenda. They have an agenda. And someone is saying something to them and they already have their mind made up about what it is the other person's talking about, There's an exception to it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But generally, when people are in a conversation, before the first person is halfway done, they're already answering or retorting what's coming out of the person's mouth, right? Yeah. Particularly in politics. There is an exception to that, though. When you listen the best?
I guess for me, it's like when I'm interested in what the person's saying.
Okay. Think about it a little more deeply. When have you listened in your life? What have been the moments in your life where you have listened the most intently to the speaker?
When I know the person's got some information that will help me in my life.
That's right. When you need help.
Okay.
When you need help, that's when you listen the best. When you need help. If the roof in your house fell in and you needed it fixed and a contractor came to see you, you would listen to him before you would start responding. If you went to see a doctor because you had concerns about a pain or you were sick, you listened to him. When people need help, that's when they listen. When I would get employees who were on the brink of losing their jobs, it was amazing how great they were at listening. And they were some of the worst listeners prior to that moment that you'd ever meet. But all of a sudden, when food was being threatened to be on the table, they became great listeners, right? And I'll tell you why that is. It's human nature. It's human nature. When we need help, that's when we listen the best. And a great leader will understand that. And so a great leader will always make sure that in very important conversations, that they will define the topic so that the employee knows that what we're talking about will help you. And when you get an employee to engage in a discussion and it starts on the front end, what I'm talking about this, Dennis, because it's going to help you. Now you have to get the employee engaged in how that is going to help. What's the why, right? Because you got to start with why. You got to answer the why at all times. However, when you start a conversation and it's about helping the person, they're going to listen better. And no one doesn't listen to their doctor, right? Not in the beginning, especially if they feel like they're about to die. All right, they're going to listen pretty darn good. Okay? But that's typically the case. There's another predictive behavior that you can use as a leader when bad things or unexpected things happen and you're dealing with a tough employee. And I learned this a long time ago. I can't tell you who originated it. A lot of people probably take credit for it, but it's an acronym. I use it as an acronym. So when an employee would be suspended from their job, or when an employee would get into so much difficulty that, let's say that they had gotten away with a certain behavior for a really long time. And if they'd gotten away with a behavior for a really long time, it's because someone allowed that to happen. And they just took advantage, of the circumstance. It could be kind of like, you have kids. I think yours are young though, right? How old are your children?
No, I don't have any kids. I hope not.
No. I'm confusing you with Blake. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, this is another person that I'm working with. That's right. But okay, but think about this. All right, whether you have kids or not, right? Every day, a parent tells their 8 or 9 year old, make up the bed. So they get up, in the morning, they get ready for school, and the bed's not made. And mom goes, make your bed. Dad goes, make your bed. So the child has learned that before the bed gets made, someone says, make the bed. Okay, then one day, they just draw a line in the sand and go, what? You know what? You didn't make your bed, so you're losing video games for the whole week. Now, every day before the bed got made, the parents said, make your bed. And that was the trigger to making the bed. So that was a taught behavior. Then all of a sudden, one day, the parents said, you know what, Johnny? I'm tired of telling you to make your bed. Your bed's not made. You're losing video games. And every 9-year-old loves video games. You're losing, that's like their addictive, addictive drug, right? You're losing video games for the next week. Now, let me tell you I'm going to tell you what'll happen with Johnny. Okay. The first emotion Johnny will have is he will be shocked. He will be shocked. It's like, what are you talking about? I make the bed after you say make the bed. Today, you didn't say it. You went in my room, the bed wasn't made, and you're taking video games from me? Johnny will be absolutely shocked. The next emotion Johnny will experience will be anger. He will get angry at his parents, no doubt, guarantee it. And sometime throughout the later moments or day, he will become resentful. He's going to resent what just happened to him because he knows that I have no video now for a week. And we were going to play an online game tonight. There were 5 of my buddies. We were all going to get on our headsets. And my parents just took that from me for not making the bed. He's going to resent them for that. And he's going to go through that emotion. And that resentment emotion might last for a couple days, maybe longer. But at some point, he's going to accept what just happened. It now is what it is. And once he accepts it, he's going to say, hey, I need some help with this. And that's a normal human emotion. It's called Sarah. And people go through Sarah when they run into unexpected things in their lives. If you were to come home tonight and your apartment was completely empty, or your house, and everything was stolen, that mic you have, your laptop, it was empty. You know what you're going to be in when you open the door? Shock. And then you're going to get angry. And then the door, someone's going to say, well, the door was open. And then you want to see people like taking all my stuff out. Then you're going to resent that no one called you. But you know what? You're going to need new stuff, right? Some point you're going to accept that this just happened. It is what it is. I got to move on. I don't care if it's a month later. You will get to acceptance. And then you're going to need help. You're going to go to people to arrange whatever you got to do to fix it. Whether it's a bed being made or someone taking all your stuff, you're going to go through Sarah. And it's an important thing. It's not anecdotal. I had employees that they would just lose a spouse, or something bad would happen in their lives, or they might lose a child. I mean, these are big, big things. And their lives were in shock. Okay, you can't, as their boss, expect them to come in and leave the personal life outside. That's a joke. It doesn't work. It's important to be able to spot when people are going through Sarah, because some of my most difficult employee, whether it was a manager, an executive, or a driver, it didn't matter what level someone's at, they can go through Sarah. Some of the most important moments in my career were identifying that someone was going through it understanding how to lead them while they were going through it so that they would come out of it in a productive way. It's a really important leadership skill, right?
How do you lead?
Those are the things when you talk about listening, because you asked the question, is listening important? It's like the crux of the matter. Unless you listen, you won't be able to understand what's going on with people.
So, like, how do you lead somebody out of Sarah?
You don't. They have to get out of it themselves. You don't lead anyone out of Sarah. What you don't do is create more disruption while they're going through it. And most bosses, quite frankly, do, okay? You know, because they're focused on making the sale or closing the deal or getting the blah, 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 you know, and there's no disconnect between results and people. You know, the biggest miss that I have seen with the thousands of people I've led, you know, in my career, thousands literally that I've led in the leadership capacity. I'm not talking about the people they were leading, you know, because there's, you know, I've led hundreds of thousands of people, but the thousands of people that have worked under me, you can't lead someone out of Sarah. I mean, if you lose, if you go bankrupt and you lose all your money and you lose your house and they foreclose and take your car, I can't lead you out of that experience. But what I can do is while you're going through that experience is stay in touch with you to make sure that you know that your income from this position you have as an employee is something that is fuel for a positive future. Don't compromise it. You know, you're going through Sarah, don't make this become a part of that. And I think what people appreciate in those moments is someone willing to appreciate they're having the moment, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you walk in and I go, hey, Dennis, let's have a conversation. You look different, you're behaving differently, you're a great employee, you always have been, you've been late the last 3 times in the last couple of weeks. You know, you're introverted right now, you're typically talking to people, now you're kind of isolated. Anything I can do to help you out? You need anything from me? That's got to be question 1. Not what's wrong, what's your problem? Mm-hmm. No one wants to go. I mean, think about it. If I sit you down and go, what's wrong with you? Okay, that was friendly. What's your problem? Okay, that's an attacking nature, right? But if I sit you down and go, hey, you know, you've always done great work and, you know, I really value you as a person. And listen, I don't want to get into any of your personal life, but is there anything I can do to help you? Because something clearly is different, at least to me. So that's not a stinging entry point, right? Entry points can't be those that put people on the defensive, right? I mean, that's what that is. You know, when you attack a person, what do you expect them to do? They're going to defend themselves, right? It's like something I learned in boxing. They're going to put their gloves up, right? Yeah, that's what they're going to do. Yeah. They're going to put their gloves up, right? So if I come at you with an aggressive question in an aggressive posture that doesn't include you in the conversation, it's just directional. You know, I'm unhappy with you. You're not doing your job. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. If that's the opening point, you're going to put your gloves up. Okay, that's the last thing I want to do. Okay, I want to always be able to have the ability to influence your behavior in a way that's positive for the company and for yourself and for the customer. And people are human, and there are going to be times where they're just having issues in their lives. And I don't need to get into a person's personal life to address what's going on at work. What I have to do as a leader is make sure that whatever's going on in their personal life doesn't impact the customer. And the way I'm going to do that is communicating with the person, and it's going to be opening the door where my ear is there. Hey, you have my ear. You have to do the work you're getting paid to do. I just want you to understand that. But if you need my help, you need to tell me that, because I'm going to do whatever I can to help you. And that's how you build a relationship that sustains, right? It's a symbiotic relationship, because they all are. 100% of a company's results, 100% of a company's results, Google, UPS, Amazon, IBM, I don't care, Pandora, I don't care. 100% of their results come from the people in the company. There's not robots doing the work, okay? Even if you have technology as a platform, someone had to build it, someone has to manage it, someone has to care enough and be passionate enough to make sure it's doing what the customer thinks it's going to do. That's a human being. And devaluing human beings is our company's number one mistake. And you can see it in employee relations surveys, is that it boggles my mind even to this day that with all the forensic data that says when you have engaged employees, when they feel they're a part of the company, those companies outperform all other companies in their stock performance, in their work-life balance, employee commitment. I mean, all of those things are connected, the financial results to the employee behaviors. And it's amazing to me, even today, with all that forensic data, how many leaders marginalize that research? How many leaders lead a group of people and let their ego do the talking? Where, hey, no, I'm the boss, okay? I'm the boss. Don't you talk to me like that. You know, people have moments. And no, they probably shouldn't talk to a boss a certain way. But there's a way to handle that, to keep that person engaged in the company's mission, right? Versus disruption and destruction ultimately, because that's what disruption with employee behavior can cause, is poor outcomes. But it's amazing to me that people just don't get that. Anyway.
No, that's a good point. How's your book going? So you're in the process now, you're in a new chapter in life and you're writing a book and you're thinking about doing a podcast as well now. So how's all that going for you?
Well, you know, it's a new frontier for me, right? I'm not like so many of you that know how to do it, just experienced at it. So, you know, the biggest challenge I've had, and this is very humbling for me, is when I was in 97, I became a president, right? So, you know, when you become a president in an organization, at least in mine, you have a team of people that do everything for you, right? They just do. They make your copies, they build your technology, they check your emails, they set your appointments. You know, you basically almost just lead. You don't have to do a lot of task-related stuff, right? So after, in 97, I became a president. So for 22, 23 years, I haven't had to do anything. I haven't had to schedule my own appointments, right, on my calendar. Listen, I'm just saying, you know, even to the point where if I had like a dental appointment or a medical appointment on a Wednesday, my assistants had to put that on the calendar because it might interfere with company business, right? So that kind of stuff got done. And so as I left UPS after a 42-year career, and I was, and the other thing is, you know, I've been in a lot of other organizations, right? I was chairman of the board for the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce with 3,000 companies on it. I was appointed and nominated and appointed as chairman of the board, something I'm very proud of in Los Angeles, as the chairman of the board of the Chamber of Commerce. I was chairman of the board of the Los Angeles Urban League, a nonprofit that serves the community in job growth and economic development, helping young people basically find their way in these really broken neighborhoods where there's a lot of gang violence. I've been involved very heavily in the United Way of America's work on homelessness with women with displaced children running away from domestic violence. I've done a lot of things and continue to do a lot of those things. And when I retired, those were going to become the main things for me, was continuing to support early education pursuits for kids in elementary school and pre-K. I think that's so important to the development of the world, not just the U.S. And then, you know, I talked about the other things. So my calendar is very, very busy. It's really busy with a lot of nonprofit engagement. But I'm writing a book, and the book is about my 42-year career and lessons I've learned in 42 years. A lot like what we're talking about. In essence, I'm just going to take my thoughts around leadership and put them to paper. And I have a lot of thoughts around leadership that I've learned. I made every mistake possible, right? That's how you learn. Mm-hmm. So I've made every mistake. I probably made some more mistakes than the average person by far, but I made a lot of mistakes, but I think I recovered from them. And I think I used those things with great mentors to be able to consider myself an effective leader, to the extent that I have a lot of other companies currently right now wanting me to run their companies. And I haven't taken them up on it, but as soon as I retired after 42 years, I was hit with immediately within a couple of weeks, a half a dozen offers to run other people's companies. But I'm not going to do that. I'm very fortunate that I can retire and I have great financial currency. That being said, I'm writing the book, and it's about leadership, and it's about my experiences in leadership. What I think are common sense principles that a frontline person should be engaged in learning and understanding, hands-on, direct frontline people. My book isn't going to be for the CEO or the COO in that way. I think any CEO or COO can read it and understand it, unless they're providing support for these things on the front line. They're going to have some difficulties. The biggest fallacy I think exists is people go to college, get this degree, even a master's degree. You know what? Let me tell you what people who have master's degrees are not. They are not masters of a profession. All right. They are learning information that will put them in a position that says, I want to be a master of this profession. I've invested time and energy beyond an undergrad degree to show everyone in the world I want to be a master in this profession, but they are not masters in a profession any more than someone who goes to med school for 4 years after undergrad isn't a master doctor, right? It says it's a lot of work. It's 4 years. It's real hard. But now they're at the beginning of life once they get into a company. So people with master's degrees are not masters. Even PhDs are not masters because they aren't in the practical side of the business. They're in the theoretical side. And it's an important side. It's a research side. And I think there's a win-win for both sides there. But, when you look at how people learn on the floor, I think there's deficiencies there when you look at the collateral in the books. And so I come from the bottom. I started my career at the very bottom of the company. It was the most important part of my life when I was 19, all the way till I was 30 and became a division manager. And a lot of my book is about that what I learned leading people at the bottom of the business, right? And how important my behavior was to their results. You can't say, pick me to be the leader, and then the work group is terrible, and say, yeah, but you know what? I'm great. They're just bad.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a great coach. I'm a great soccer coach. My soccer team is just terrible. It's not me. It has nothing to do with me. I just need better people. Okay, people are like that now. People are like that. And they'll want to blame all the ills of the group on the group. Hello, we're paying you like a lot of money to be the leader, and it's supposed to have positive influence, whether it's 2 people or 200,000 people. And it takes a certain, I think, experience. You can't read experience. I used to joke with my division managers and go, you know what? Listen, when I walk in here, and this would happen every time I would go visit Seattle, Texas, New York, man, I don't care where I was going. I'd walk in the door. I'd be met and greeted. Someone would pick me up, blah, blah, blah. We're going to have this big meeting. They're going to show me how the results are going. It'd be like 30 people in the room presenting to me with slides and graphs. And I didn't do all of that pomp and circumstance. I was not into pomp. I was only into circumstance, okay? And how I could help them with their circumstances. That was it for me, right? I didn't need all the other stuff. But I'd go in a meeting, and I'd make sure that the way we started the meeting was more about them than it was about me coming there. Because let's just face it. Hey, I ran the U.S. People, I'd walk in, and this was a huge deal for them. Okay. When I was a president, it was a huge deal for them. Oh man, the president's coming. Because I was in their jobs. I know how that went. When I was a manager and a supervisor and the president was coming, I wouldn't sleep for 2 nights because this guy was coming, right? So I never wanted to recreate that, right? I didn't. So my book is a lot about those kinds of topics, right? And it's about how do you provide value if you're a leader to the people on the floor. But it's also about, but it also goes to people on the floor being able to read it and say, you know, I need to think about that. Just like that example I talked about earlier with not making the bed. You can't let an employee come to work late, you know, once a week for a month or 2 months. And then a new boss shows up and goes, hey, Dennis, why are you letting Noel be late all the time? And then you sit me down and blow me up. I'm going to be in Sarah on you. Okay. The trust, our relationship will be hard to recover, right? You should not leave because your boss told you to do something a certain way and you were allowing it not to be done because the boss never said so. Okay. You need to be leading with integrity, respect, and accountability as a leader all the time, which means you take ownership for your own personal behavior, right? So I never blamed my people for bad things. If bad things were happening, it was my role to make them unbad. And so if they kept happening, it meant that I just hadn't figured out how to make them unbad yet. But I didn't get to blame them for bad things. All bad things that happened in my group were my responsibility, and I took ownership for them. And I expected everyone to take ownership for the one thing we all get to control completely. The one thing every human being, no debate, nobody can debate it. The one thing every human being gets to control 100% every day is their own behavior. Everybody gets to control their own personal behavior. And it was important for me to establish that. So it had to start with me. If I didn't control my own behavior, how am I expect my people to believe that that makes sense, right? So if you get angry at a customer, that's not the company that made you do that. You did that. That was you personally. You just felt like being mad at them. Don't say it was the company that made you be mad at them. We didn't issue an order today on the memo that says be mad at all the customers, okay? Today is be mad at the customers day. That was a personal choice that an employee made. It just is. If I came in and I didn't respect the work group and I yelled at them, right? I got like 50 people and I stand on the podium and go, blah, 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 you better, blah, blah, blah. And I yell at them. Oh, yeah, they're really going to go out with a positive attitude after that. Mm-hmm. That was my behavior that caused that. So I think it's important for leaders to think about that, right? You know, the funny thing about being a human is even you hear me say it and you go, yeah, that's obvious. It's obvious. It's obvious. You know what? In the heat of the battle, it's not. In the heat of the battle, it's not. And so my book is about helping people understand conceptually these things to make them better leaders, maybe to help them. Anyway, if I learned a few things and if I can pass them on, I want to do that. So I've been doing that and I want to start a podcast, of course. That's why I keep asking you all these podcasty questions, right? And then I want to start a blog, right? Yeah. And so they will all be hinged on those things. But the other component of the blog I want to engage in is with Americans, and I don't know what's going on in Europe, which is why I say Americans. I do know what's going on here. Need to be more engaged in what's happening with children that are not their own, right? Hey, we're supposed to care about our own kids. That's easy, okay? But if we really want to influence things that we think are important to change in the future, then we need to influence the first, second, third, and fourth graders of today, because they're going to run the place, in 20 years, in 12 years. They're going to be the bosses in 20 years, and they're going to be adults in 12. And they need to be able to read properly so they can digest information. Literacy is one of the most problematic areas in the U.S. for second and third graders. Like, they can't read at grade level, right? You give them a book, they're in the second grade, it's a second grade book, they can't read it. They're in the third grade, you give them a third grade book, they can't read it. That's like one of the most pressing issues in our country, especially if you're below a certain socioeconomic status level, right? In terms of how much money your parents make. And the data just supports that. But when a child can read at the third grade level, when they're in the third grade, research says that 90+% of them graduate high school. When they can't read at the third grade level, when they're in the third grade, research says only 60 something percent of them graduate high school. So that third grade year is really important in life, because kids that graduate high school have lower criminality. They have lower disenfranchisement issues. They have lower everything that's negative issues. So if you want to impact positively a society, put your money in the second and third grade. And if you have outstanding third graders who can read and comprehend information, you can predictive analytics. You can predict that in 20 years, your societal norms will be a lot more collaborative and you'll have education that looks that way, right? So I'm involved in that. It's a passionate area of mine. And I sit on a board of an organization called TutorMate. And TutorMate has a program that they develop that allows people to read to a second grader from their office once a week for 30 minutes. And that second grader can be 300 miles away from you. But every week you can read with them for 30 minutes. And it's proven to improve literacy in second and third graders. So I do that. And so my book, at some point, after I write my leadership book, I'm going to write a book about corporate responsibility and use examples like TutorMate and the Urban League and the United Way, things I did and saw, some tough things, some bad things. So that's another concept. Hopefully that, after I get through one, I got to get through one first before I start thinking about more. But that's what I'm doing.
So how would people find you online?
I have a website. I have a website. I'm on LinkedIn, so people can find me on LinkedIn today. And I actually get, typical week for me in LinkedIn, I typically get about 200 to 300 visitors to my LinkedIn site. And I don't even have a good one. It's terrible. I haven't done anything to it. But I typically get 200 to 300 visits there a week on my LinkedIn. I get a lot of views because I speak at a lot of panels. I do a lot of that kind of stuff, transportation, logistic type stuff. Or I did, and I have done a few lately, even after retirement. But I have a web page being built, and my web page will be Noel Massie. When you put in Noel Massie, or you go to LinkedIn, it'll put you to my web page, and my leadership content will be on my web page. My book will be, obviously, hopefully there soon. At least within 6 months to 10 months. And then my podcast link will really be around my book. My podcast, I'll do chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully I'll build an audio book from it as well. But it's just going to be like you and I just spoke for an hour. I intend to do like a 30-minute podcast on topics, conflict resolution, handling difficult employees, handling a difficult boss, how to get promoted and get noticed. All of these kind of things, I'll put the things that I've learned that I promoted thousands of people personally. So I think I know a little bit about that. I've promoted people that make $500,000 a year. So I think I know a lot about entry-level promotions and all the way to the C-suite because I did it, right? I was the guy making the decision with a group of people, but I was involved heavily in the process. And some of that will go to I'll do some lectures in colleges and universities for people that are about to graduate on what to expect in corporate America. That's a talk I'm going to build and market to the university systems.
Sounds good. Some exciting stuff.
Yep.
Thanks, Noel. It was great hearing about the leadership lessons you've learned and some of your story as well. It was great to get some somebody who's got experience in all this and to share some of the key things that you learned and some of the potentially could be counterintuitive things that people haven't thought about. So it's good stuff. Thanks again.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I'll end with saying this, and I really want to get this in. My leadership style, I'd be, kidding anyone if I didn't say that my leadership style had a lot to do with the culture I grew up in and the company I worked for. The founder of UPS, Jim Casey, was an Irish American, and I'm not saying that because you're an Irishman, but I think it's interesting. But he was an Irish American. His family immigrated to America in the 1800s. And he lived in Seattle, Washington as a child. And in 1899, Jim Casey's father died. And you think about an 11-year-old kid in Seattle, Washington in 1899. And he had a mom, and his mother had just had a baby. So she had a brand newborn, and he had two younger brothers. When he was 11, his two younger brothers were 5 and 7. And Jim Casey didn't go out and panhandle or beg for money or whatever in order to make sure his family ate. He was taught responsibility by his dad. His dad died as a result of being in the Klondike looking for gold. He got tuberculosis. So you got this 11-year-old kid, and he literally, and you can read this in the history of UPS, which is in publications. But at 11 years old, Jim Casey became a messenger boy for a tea store. And that's how he paid the rent. He was making $2.50 a week. And he paid the rent at 11. This kid took responsibility for his family at 11. And more importantly, from the time he was 11 until he was 15, he was a messenger boy. And back in the day, he ran messengers. You didn't have faxes and all that. It was messenger boys. Up to the point where when Jim Casey was 15, he was making $5 a week. Okay, let me put that in context for people. $1 in 1900 in today's money, 2019, is easily 100 to 1. So Jim Casey was making like $500 a week as a 15-year-old, and he was paying the rent. And him and two other messenger boys started a delivery company in on their own hind legs when he was 15. And so that was in 1903. So in 1903, him and two other messenger boys started a company that they ran for 2 years. So you think about being 15 in 1903, running a messenger service. Talk about character, are you kidding me? And so his determination, reliability, dependability, all of those things was who he was. And in 1907, after having been in Reno, Nevada, looking for gold, which didn't work out too well, that's when he started UPS. But because he had been treated so poorly as a human being, because I think anyone that understands U.S. history knows that if you were Irish, you had the lowest level jobs. They were a step above African Americans and minorities, and African American like me and minorities. And they were a few notches below, people that were from other European, especially the English. I mean, not to do anything but state history. In America, the Polish and the Irish, they were at the bottom of the deal. They did cleaning jobs, right? Woodwork, cleaning jobs. That was the life he came from. And so he felt, as a result of his experiences when he was 19, that his company would be a fair company. That's where all that lands. That his company would respect human beings as they should be respected. It would give them a fair opportunity based on their work. It would treat them as men and women, not as children. And that was always important to him as adults, and that they would be included collaboratively in the direction of the company. The reason UPS has 450,000 people today is the 8th largest airline in the world with over 600 large aircraft. Is the largest privately founded supply chain company ever created in the world, is because the man who started it was fair to people. And in return, he got their loyalty with a vengeance. And that's the company I grew up in. So I only know that leadership style. I only know a leadership style where you always include the employees in the process, in the discussion. And even to the point where you give them a stake in the company, because I had a stake in the company. And it would really be remiss if I didn't add that, at least to this podcast, that, my philosophy and ideology comes from that. I didn't create it on my own. It's my unique perspective, but it's not my unique ideology, and I just want anyone that's listening to be able to understand how those two things go together. So I was really fortunate. I didn't work for a bad company. I didn't work for a company that didn't care about people. I worked in a company when I was from the day I was 19 that made me feel like I mattered. And they made me feel like I mattered a lot to the point of inclusion. And my work was what mattered the most, right? If I got the job done, I was getting it done. I got credit for that and recognition for that. And that fueled the rest of my career at UPS. So there you go. Thanks, Dennis.
Good stuff. No, great to hear the background story. I didn't know about that background story for UPS. So good stuff. Thanks again, Noel. Thanks again.
Wade,
thanks for your time.
Nice talking to you. Look forward to keeping in touch. All right.
Yeah. Until next time, have fun and enjoy the process.